Story start now. The night a phone call saved my life. I never thought I would be the kind of person with a scary medical story to tell. You know, the type of stories people share at dinner parties or family gatherings that make everyone go quiet and lean in closer. The ones that make you grateful for your own health and maybe a little more aware of how fragile life can actually be. But here I am, years later, still shaken by what happened to me when I was just 35 years old. Still angry about how close I came to never seeing my children grow up. Still amazed that I survived it all. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding what happened requires knowing the whole picture. I was 35, married to a wonderful man named David, and we had 4 beautiful children who were the center of our world. Our oldest, Sarah, had just turned 14 while I was in the hospital. She was at that difficult age where she needed her mother more than ever, even though she would never admit it. Then there was Michael, who was 12 and playing Little League baseball. Emma was 9 and obsessed with her art projects and science experiments. And then our baby little Noah was only 4 years old. 4 years old and still so small, still climbing into our bed in the middle of the night when he had bad dreams, still needing his mommy for almost everything. Life was busy and chaotic and beautiful in the way that life with 4 kids always is. Between school pickups and baseball practice and helping with homework and making dinner and doing laundry and all the million other things that fill up a Mother's Day, I barely had time to breathe. But I loved every exhausting minute of it. I loved being their mom. It was the most important thing in my world. That's why when I started having some concerning symptoms, I tried to ignore them at first. I told myself I was just tired, that I was just stressed, that it was nothing to worry about because I had too much to do and too many people depending on me to slow down. But the symptoms got worse. The bleeding became heavier. The pain became sharper. And finally, after my mother practically dragged me to the doctor, I got the news that would change everything. Cervical cancer, stage 2, aggressive, needed immediate treatment. I remember sitting in that doctor's office, holding David's hand so tight I probably cut off his circulation, and all I could think about was my babies. About Sarah, who was becoming a young woman. About Michael and his baseball dreams. About Emma and her curious mind. About Noah, who was still so little. What would happen to them if something happened to me? Who would braid Emma's hair for school? Who would help Michael practice his batting? Who would tuck Noah in at night and check for monsters under his bed? The doctor recommended a partial hysterectomy. He explained that we needed to act fast, that the cancer was spreading, that this was my best chance for survival. I would lose my uterus but keep my ovaries. I would never have more children, but I would hopefully be around to raise the 4 I already had. When he put it like that, there was really no choice at all. We scheduled the surgery for 2 weeks later. Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and fear, and trying to be strong for my kids while falling apart inside. I cooked meals and froze them. I wrote out detailed instructions for David about everyone's schedules and preferences and routines. I bought birthday presents months in advance just in case. I tried not to think about the just-in-case part. My mom came to stay with us to help David with the kids during my hospital stay and recovery. She's always been my rock, my biggest supporter, my fiercest protector. I was so grateful to have her there, even though I could see the worry in her eyes every time she looked at me. She was scared too, maybe even more scared than I was, because she was my mother, and the thought of losing her child is every parent's worst nightmare. The day of the surgery arrived. I kissed each of my babies goodbye before David drove me to the hospital. Sarah tried to be brave, but I could see tears in her eyes. Michael gave me an extra long hug. Emma made me promise I would be home soon. And Noah, my sweet baby Noah, didn't really understand what was happening. He just knew Mommy was going somewhere, and he wanted to come too. Breaking away from him was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The surgery itself went well. At least that's what they told me afterward. The doctor came out and told David and my mom that everything had gone according to plan, that they had removed what they needed to remove, that the cancer appeared to be contained. They were cautiously optimistic. Those were the words they used. Cautiously optimistic. I woke up in recovery feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Everything hurt. My abdomen felt like it was on fire. I was dizzy and nauseous and disoriented. But I was alive. The surgery was over. Now I just needed to heal and get home to my family. They moved me to a regular hospital room that evening. My mom stayed with me, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair next to my bed because she refused to leave my side. David had to go home to the kids, but he called every few hours to check on me. The nurses came in and out, checking my vitals, adjusting my four, making sure I was comfortable. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. Sarah's 14th birthday fell during my hospital stay. I felt terrible about it. What kind of mother misses her daughter's birthday? But Sarah was understanding. She came to visit me that day with David and my other kids, and we celebrated as best we could in that sterile hospital room. David had brought cupcakes and we sang happy birthday, and Sarah opened her presents while sitting on the edge of my hospital bed. It wasn't the celebration she deserved, but she smiled and said it was okay. She was just glad I was okay. That was the day things started to go wrong. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there. I was feeling worse instead of better. My body ached in ways that didn't seem right. I was tired in a way that felt different from normal post-surgery exhaustion. But I told myself it was normal, that surgery takes a lot out of you, that healing takes time, that I just needed to be patient. The next day, I started running a fever. Not just a little fever, a high fever. The kind of fever that makes your whole body feel like it's burning from the inside out. I was sweating through my hospital gown. The sheets were soaked. I was shaking with chills even though I felt like I was on fire. My mom noticed immediately. She could see that something was very wrong. She pressed the call button for the nurse. We waited and waited. Finally, a nurse came in. Not my regular nurse. This was someone I hadn't seen before. She seemed rushed and annoyed that we had called her. My mom explained that I had a fever and wasn't feeling well. The nurse barely looked at me. She took my temperature with one of those forehead thermometers. You know the kind. The ones where you just wave it across someone's forehead and it gives you a reading. She glanced at it quickly and said it was normal. My mom and I both protested. Normal? How could it be normal when I was clearly burning up? When sweat was pouring off me? When I could barely think straight because my head was pounding and my body felt like it was shutting down? The nurse was dismissive. Rude, even. She said post-surgical patients often feel warm. She said I was probably just having a normal reaction to the pain medication. She said I was fine and that I needed to stop worrying so much. She spoke to us like we were children, like we were being hysterical over nothing, like our concerns didn't matter. My mom is not someone who backs down easily. She insisted the nurse check again. She said something was clearly wrong with me. The nurse sighed dramatically like we were wasting her precious time. She took my temperature again, this time with an oral thermometer. She looked at the reading and said it showed a very slight elevation but nothing to be concerned about. She said she would note it in my chart. Then she left. But I wasn't fine. I knew I wasn't fine. A mother knows her own body, and I could feel that something was seriously wrong. As the hours passed, I felt worse and worse. The fever climbed higher. My thinking became foggy. My mom kept pressing the call button. Different nurses came. They all said similar things, that I was okay, that this was normal, that I just needed to rest. One nurse even suggested that I was being dramatic because I was tired and emotional from the surgery. I started to wonder if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe this was all normal and I just didn't know it because I'd never had major surgery before. But then I would feel another wave of heat wash over me and my body would shake with chills and I would know deep in my gut that this wasn't right. My mom was getting more and more worried and more angry. She's a polite person, my mom. She was raised to respect authority and trust medical professionals. But she was watching her daughter get sicker and sicker while the nurses told her everything was fine and her patience was wearing thin. That nurse came back later in the evening, the dismissive one, the rude one. My mom tried again to express our concerns. The nurse barely listened. She checked my 4, adjusted something on the monitor and told us I was recovering normally. My mom asked her to please call my doctor. The nurse said that wasn't necessary. She said doctors don't appreciate being bothered for minor issues in the middle of the night. She made it sound like we were being unreasonable. After she left, my mom and I looked at each other. We both knew the situation was getting dangerous, but what could we do? The medical professionals were telling us everything was fine. Were we supposed to just override them? Were we supposed to insist we knew better than the trained nurses? As night fell, I got worse, much worse. The fever was so high now that I was becoming delirious. I couldn't focus my eyes properly. My thoughts were scattered and confused. I would drift in and out, sometimes not even knowing where I was. My mom was terrified. I could see it on her face every time I managed to focus on her. She kept pressing that call button. Nurses would come, check the same things, say the same words, and leave. My mom asked again for someone to call my doctor. They said the doctor was off duty, and the on-call doctor would only come for emergencies. Apparently, in their professional opinion, this wasn't an emergency. I don't remember much of that night clearly. It's all fragments, flashes of memory, my mom's worried face, the two bright hospital lights. The feeling of being so hot and so cold at the same time. The sense that something terrible was happening to my body and no one would listen. At some point in the middle of the night, in one of my clearer moments, I made a decision. I asked my mom to hand me my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I found the number for my doctor's answering service. I knew it by heart because I'd had to call it a few times over the years for my kids when they were sick in the middle of the night. I called it. A woman answered. I could barely speak clearly enough to explain who I was and what was wrong, but I tried. I told her my name. I told her I'd had surgery a few days ago. I told her I was running a high fever, and the nurses were saying I was fine, but I knew something was very wrong. I told her I needed help. She was kind, professional. She said she would reach the on-call doctor right away. She told me to hang in there. I hung up the phone and closed my eyes, praying that someone would come. That someone would finally listen. I don't know exactly how much time passed, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20. But suddenly there was a commotion outside my room, voices, footsteps. The door burst open and a doctor I didn't recognize strode in. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt with a white coat thrown over them. He'd clearly gotten dressed in a hurry, but he was there. He had come. He took one look at me, and his expression changed completely. He immediately started examining me, asking me questions, checking things the nurses had supposedly already checked. He took my temperature himself. His jaw tightened when he saw the reading. He felt my abdomen very gently because even the lightest touch made me cry out in pain. He looked at my incision site. Then he did something that probably saved my life. He didn't bother calling for a wheelchair. He didn't wait for an orderly. He just released the brake on my hospital bed and started wheeling it himself. He was taking me somewhere. My mom grabbed her purse and hurried after us. He wheeled me down the hallway, moving fast, pushing that bed like his life depended on it. Or rather, like mine did. I could hear him talking, issuing orders to nurses we passed, telling someone to call someone else, using medical terms I didn't understand. His voice was urgent, commanding. This was a man who knew something was seriously wrong and wasn't going to waste any time. He took me to an exam room and immediately started running tests, blood work, cultures, imaging, things I couldn't even name. He worked quickly and efficiently, and even though I was so sick I could barely stay conscious, I felt safe for the first time in hours. Someone was finally taking this seriously. Someone was finally helping me. The results came back fast. I remember the doctor's face when he saw them, the way his mouth set in a grim line, the way he immediately pulled out his phone and started making calls. Urgent calls about antibiotics and ICU beds and specialists. That's when he told me. I had sepsis, a severe infection in my blood. My body was shutting down, fighting for its life. If we had waited much longer, if I hadn't made that phone call, I probably wouldn't have made it through the night. Sepsis. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I knew what sepsis was. I knew people died from it. I knew it was serious, but hearing that I had it, that it was happening to me, that I had been that close to dying while nurses told me I was fine. It was almost too much to process. The doctor got me started on heavy-duty antibiotics immediately. Broad spectrum, he called them. He said we were fighting an infection but didn't know exactly what kind yet, so we had to hit it with everything we had. He transferred me to the ICU for closer monitoring. He stayed with me for hours, checking on me constantly, adjusting medications, running more tests. My mom was allowed to stay with me in the ICU. She held my hand and cried. She told me later that she had been so scared, that she had known something was terribly wrong but hadn't known how to make anyone listen, that she had felt helpless watching me get sicker while being told everything was fine. I was in the ICU for 3 days. The antibiotics gradually started working. My fever began to come down. The infection started to clear. Slowly, carefully, my body started to heal for real this time. The doctors told me I was lucky, that if I had waited even a few more hours to call for help, the outcome might have been very different. During those 3 days, something else happened, something I only learned about afterward because I was too sick to notice at the time. That doctor, the one who had come rushing to the hospital in the middle of the night, the one who had immediately recognized how serious my condition was, had a conversation with that nurse, the dismissive one, the one who had ignored my fever and treated my mom and me like we were being hysterical. My mom heard it. She was walking down the hallway getting some coffee from the vending machine when she heard raised voices. She recognized the doctor's voice. And then she heard him absolutely laying into someone. She couldn't hear every word, but she heard enough. He was furious. He was telling someone that they had nearly killed a patient through negligence, that ignoring a post-surgical patient's fever was inexcusable, that failing to report concerning symptoms to a physician was a serious breach of duty, that someone could have died because of incompetence. My mom never saw that nurse again, not once during the rest of my hospital stay. I don't know what happened to her, whether she was fired or transferred or just put on a different shift. I don't know if she faced any real consequences for nearly costing me my life, but I do know she wasn't allowed near me again. I spent 2 more weeks in the hospital after that, recovering from both the surgery and the sepsis. It was hard, it was painful, but I was alive. And every day I thought about how close I had come to not being alive, how close my kids had come to losing their mother, how close David had come to being a single father to 4 children. I thought about Sarah turning 14 without me, about Michael growing up and playing baseball without me there to cheer him on, about Emma's curious questions that would never be answered, about Noah growing up without any real memories of his mother. The thought made me physically ill. When I finally got to go home, my kids were waiting for me. They had made a banner that said, "Welcome home, Mommy," and hung it over the front door. Noah ran to me, and I had to be careful because I was still healing, but I hugged him as tight as I could anyway. All 4 of my babies gathered around me, and I cried. I cried because I was home. I cried because I had almost never come home. I cried because I was so grateful to be alive. My mom stayed with us for several more weeks to help with my recovery. She took care of the kids while David took care of me. She cooked and cleaned and drove everyone everywhere they needed to go. And sometimes, late at night when the kids were asleep, she would sit with me and we would talk about what had happened, about how scared we had both been, about how angry we both still were. She told me I should file a complaint, that the hospital needed to know what had happened, that the nurse needed to face consequences. Part of me agreed. Part of me wanted justice, but another part of me just wanted to move on. I was tired. I was still healing. I just wanted to focus on getting better and being there for my family. Eventually, I did file a report with the hospital. I documented everything that had happened. The dismissed concerns, the ignored fever, the rude treatment, the near-fatal delay in proper care. I never heard back about what actions, if any, were taken, but I hope my report meant something. I hope it prevented the same thing from happening to someone else. The physical recovery took months, but the emotional recovery took even longer. I had nightmares about being back in that hospital room burning with fever while people told me I was fine. I had anxiety attacks when I had to go back for follow-up appointments. I was terrified of doctors and hospitals in a way I had never been before. But I also developed a new appreciation for life, for my family, for every ordinary moment I might have taken for granted before. I cherished the chaos of mornings getting everyone ready for school. I savored the exhaustion of helping with homework and making dinner and giving baths. I treasured the moments of tucking my kids into bed at night, knowing I had almost lost the privilege of being there to do it. Sarah is an adult now. She's in college studying to be a nurse. She says she was inspired by the experience of seeing me go through that ordeal. She wants to be the kind of nurse who listens to patients, who takes concerns seriously, who never dismisses someone's pain or fear. I'm so proud of her. Michael did end up playing baseball in high school. I went to every single game I could. I cheered until my voice was hoarse. I never took for granted that I was there to watch him. Emma became a doctor, a researcher actually. She studies infectious diseases. She says she remembers how scared she was when I was sick, and she wants to help find better ways to treat infections so other families don't have to go through what we went through. And Noah, my baby, is a teenager now. He doesn't remember much about that time when he was 4, but he knows the story. He knows how close he came to losing his mother. Sometimes he still crawls into bed with me when he has a bad dream, even though he's way too big for it now. And I let him, because I remember all too clearly how close I came to never being there for those moments. Looking back now, I realize how many things had to go right for me to survive. I had to have a mother who refused to give up. I had to have enough presence of mind, even in my delirium, to make that phone call. I had to reach a doctor who took my concerns seriously and acted immediately. Any one of those things going differently, and I wouldn't be here today. But the thing that still makes me angry all these years later is that I almost died because someone wasn't doing their job, because a nurse decided that her judgment was more important than her patient's symptoms, because someone was too busy or too dismissive or too convinced of their own rightness to actually listen. Medical professionals are human. They make mistakes. I understand that. But there's a difference between an honest mistake and negligence. There's a difference between an error in judgment and refusing to listen when a patient tells you something is wrong. That nurse's negligence nearly left my husband alone to raise 4 children. It nearly robbed Sarah of having her mother there when she graduated high school and college. It nearly meant Michael wouldn't have had me there to help him through his first heartbreak. It nearly meant Emma wouldn't have had anyone to encourage her love of science. It nearly meant Noah would have grown up without any real memory of me at all. I tell this story now not to scare people, but to empower them. To remind them that you know your own body. You know when something isn't right. And if a medical professional dismisses your concerns, you have the right to insist on being heard. You have the right to ask for a second opinion. You have the right to call your doctor directly if you feel you're not getting proper care. That phone call I made, shaking and feverish in the middle of the night, saved my life. It gave me back my future. It gave my children back their mother. And I will never forget how close I came to not making it, how close we all came to a very different ending to this story. So please, if you or someone you love is ever in a situation where you feel something is seriously wrong and you're not being heard, speak up. Insist on proper care. Make that phone call. Because you deserve to be listened to. You deserve to be taken seriously. And you deserve to live. I'm here today because I refuse to accept being dismissed, because my mother refused to stop advocating for me, because one doctor dropped everything and came running when a patient needed help. I'm here because, against the odds and despite someone's negligence, things went right at the last possible moment. But I'm also painfully aware of how easily it could have gone the other way. And that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Next one story, start now. The living room coffins. There are certain things in life that you expect when you marry someone. You expect to love them. You expect to build a life together. You expect to deal with the usual in-law situations, like different opinions about how to raise kids or where to spend the holidays. What you don't expect is to walk into your mother-in-law's living room and see her taking an afternoon nap in her own handmade coffin displayed proudly in front of the picture window like it's a perfectly normal piece of furniture. But that's exactly what happened to me. And honestly, it's a story I still can't quite believe even though I lived through it for years. My mother-in-law, who I'll call Linda because that was her name, was one of the most unusual people I've ever met in my entire life. And I don't mean unusual in a charming, quirky way. I mean unusual in a way that made you constantly question whether what you were seeing was actually real, or if you had somehow stumbled into some bizarre alternate reality where normal rules didn't apply. Let me back up a bit and give you some context, because understanding Linda requires understanding the whole picture. When I married my husband Tom, I knew his family situation was a bit complicated. His biological mother had passed away when he was just a teenager, which was absolutely tragic. From what Tom told me, she had been a warm, loving woman who made their house feel like a real home. She cooked big family dinners. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She made holidays special. She was, by all accounts, the kind of mother and wife that people dream about having. After she died, Tom's father was lost for a while, completely devastated. The man had loved his wife deeply, and losing her so suddenly left a huge hole in his life and in their family. Tom and his siblings did their best to support their dad, but they were dealing with their own grief too. It was a dark time for all of them. A few years later, Tom's father met Linda. She had been widowed herself, so they had that shared experience of loss. They started dating, and eventually they got married. Tom was already an adult by then, just starting college, so Linda didn't really raise him or anything like that. She came into the picture after most of the parenting was already done. But she was going to be his stepmother, and by extension, she was going to be part of our lives once Tom and I got together. I met Linda for the first time about 6 months into my relationship with Tom. He had warned me that she was a bit different, a bit quirky, he said. Has her own way of doing things, he said. Doesn't always think like other people, he said. I thought, okay, fine. Everyone's family has their oddities. My own family certainly wasn't perfect. How different could she really be? Oh, how naive I was. The first time I went to their house for dinner, I started to get an idea of what Tom meant. Linda greeted us at the door wearing what looked like an outfit she had pieced together from several different garage sales, none of which had been held in the same decade. Nothing matched. Nothing fit quite right. But she seemed completely confident in her appearance, which I guess you have to admire on some level. Dinner was an experience. Linda had cooked, and I use that term loosely. She had made what she called her special casserole, which appeared to be a combination of leftover ingredients that had no business being in the same dish together. There were noodles and canned tuna, and what I think were crushed crackers and maybe some frozen peas and something else I couldn't identify. It was all mixed together and baked until it reached a concerning consistency. Tom's father, who I'll call Frank, ate it without complaint. He had clearly learned that commenting on Linda's cooking was not worth the trouble. Tom pushed his food around his plate and tried to eat enough to be polite. I did the same, forcing down small bites and smiling like it was delicious. But the food wasn't even the strangest part of that first dinner. The strangest part was Linda's conversation. She spent a good 20 minutes telling us, in great detail, about a lamp she had bought at a thrift store. Not because it was beautiful or antique or had any special meaning. No, she was proud of it because she had talked the price down from $3 to $1.50. She had negotiated hard for that $1.50 discount, and she wanted us to know all about her victory. Then she moved on to telling us about the dish towels she had gotten at a clearance sale. 75% off, she announced proudly. Never mind that they were an ugly brown color and had stains on them that wouldn't come out no matter how many times you washed them. She'd gotten a deal, and that was what mattered. I smiled and nodded and wondered what I had gotten myself into. Tom caught my eye across the table and gave me a look that said, "I told you so." He had definitely told me so, but I don't think any amount of warning could have really prepared me for Linda. As time went on and Tom and I got more serious, eventually getting engaged and then married, I had more and more interactions with Linda. Each one reinforced what I had learned at that first dinner. Linda was obsessed with saving money and getting deals, to a degree that went far beyond normal frugality and crossed over into something else entirely. Gift-giving occasions were particularly challenging. Birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, it didn't matter. Linda approached all of them the same way. She would find the cheapest possible gift she could, regardless of whether it was actually useful or wanted or even appropriate, and then she would spend the entire time you were opening it telling you what an amazing deal she had gotten. For Tom's birthday one year, she gave him a set of tools. Now, Tom is pretty handy, so tools aren't a bad gift idea in general. The problem was that these tools were completely rusted, like covered in rust to the point where they were basically unusable. She had found them at a garage sale, she explained proudly, and had talked the seller down to just $5 for the whole set. What a bargain! Tom looked at these rusted wrenches and screwdrivers that he would never be able to use and thanked her politely. Later, when we got home, he just shook his head and put them in the garage, where they sat untouched for years before we finally threw them away during a move. For our wedding, Linda gave us sheets for our bed. Sheets aren't a bad gift either, in theory. Practical, useful, something we would need. Except these sheets were the wrong size. We had a queen bed. She gave us full-size sheets. When we gently mentioned this, she waved away our concern and said we could just tuck them in really tight and they would be fine. They were such a good deal, she explained. 60% off. We couldn't expect her to pass that up just because they weren't the exact right size. We never used those sheets. They sat in our linen closet for a while before we eventually donated them to Goodwill, which felt somehow appropriate given that Linda probably would have bought them from Goodwill herself. But as strange as Linda's gift-giving was, and as odd as her general personality could be, nothing quite prepared us for the coffin situation. Nothing could have prepared us for that. It started when Linda took up woodworking as a hobby. She had always been the type of person who jumped from one interest to another, never sticking with anything for very long but throwing herself completely into whatever captured her attention at the moment. She had gone through a ceramics phase, a knitting phase, a phase where she tried to learn to play the accordion for some reason. Woodworking was just the latest thing. To give credit where it's due, Linda was actually pretty good at woodworking. She had a natural talent for it. She made some beautiful pieces, a bookshelf for their living room that was actually quite nice, a small table that looked professional, some decorative items that you could tell had been made with care and skill. We all thought this was a good hobby for her. It kept her busy. It gave her something to focus on. It resulted in actual useful items instead of just costing money like some hobbies do. We were supportive, encouraging even. Then one day Tom got a phone call from his father. Frank's voice on the other end of the line sounded tired, more tired than usual, which was saying something because the man often sounded exhausted from dealing with Linda's various schemes and ideas. He told Tom that Linda had a new woodworking project, a big one. She had decided that she was going to build coffins, for both of them, for herself and for Frank, to use when they died. There was a long pause on Tom's end of the phone. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but I could fill in the blanks pretty easily. Tom said something like, "She wants to what now?" His father repeated the information. Linda was building coffins. Tom asked why. Frank explained that Linda wanted to save money on funeral expenses. She had apparently done some research and discovered that coffins are expensive, which is true, and had decided that the smart, frugal thing to do would be to just make their own and have them ready for whenever they were needed. Tom didn't really know what to say to that. What do you say when your stepmother announces she's building her own coffin? He settled on asking if Frank was okay with this plan. Frank sighed and said that Linda was going to do what Linda was going to do, and at least it kept her busy and out of trouble. When Tom told me about this conversation, I laughed. I thought it was ridiculous, but also kind of funny in a dark humor sort of way. I mean, it was definitely weird, but it was also very Linda. Of course she would decide to make her own coffin to save money. That was completely in character for her. I figured she would build them and then store them somewhere sensible, the garage maybe, or a storage shed, somewhere out of sight where they could wait until they were needed, hopefully many years in the future. I did not expect what actually happened. A few weeks later, we went to visit Tom's father and Linda. We walked in the front door like we always did, calling out a greeting as we entered. Linda came bustling out from the kitchen, wearing an apron covered in flour because she had been baking something that would probably turn out as oddly as everything else she made. She was excited. More excited than I had seen her in a while. She told us she had something to show us. She grabbed Tom's arm and practically dragged him toward the living room, with me following behind, curious about what had her so worked up. We walked into the living room, and there it was, right there in front of the big picture window that looked out onto their front yard. A coffin, an actual real human-sized coffin, made of wood beautifully crafted, with a smooth finish and careful attention to detail. It was, objectively speaking, a very nice piece of woodworking. It was also a coffin, in the living room, on display. Linda was beaming with pride. She walked over to it and ran her hand along the smooth wood, pointing out all the features she had included. The sturdy construction, the quality of the joints, the way the lid fit perfectly. She had clearly put a lot of work into it, and from a purely craftsmanship perspective, it was impressive. Tom and I stood there, staring at this coffin in the living room, trying to process what we were seeing. I kept waiting for the punchline, for Linda to laugh and say she was just kidding, that she was going to move it to the garage or something. But the punchline never came. She was completely serious. She explained that she had finished the first one, this one, which was going to be hers. She was still working on Frank's, which was out in her workshop in the garage. Once both were done, she explained, they would have them all ready and wouldn't have to worry about the expense when the time came. Tom asked very carefully why the coffin was in the living room. Linda looked at him like he had asked the strangest question. Where else would it be, she wanted to know. It was a beautiful piece of furniture. Why wouldn't she display it? Furthermore, she continued, it was also practical. Until she actually needed it for its intended purpose, she could use it for storage. She lifted the lid to show us that it was currently full of blankets and extra pillows. See? Practical! I caught Tom's eye and could see that he was having the same reaction I was. A mixture of disbelief, confusion, and a sort of horrified fascination. This was happening. This was really happening. His stepmother had built herself a coffin and was using it as a blanket chest in the living room. But wait, as they say in those infomercials, there's more. Linda told us that she had also put an Afghan over it, one that she had crocheted herself in colors that didn't quite go together. And sometimes, she said casually, like she was mentioning the weather, she would lie down on top of the coffin and take a nap. It was the perfect size, she explained. Very comfortable. The height was just right. Tom's father had been sitting in his recliner during this whole explanation, reading the newspaper and pretending this was all completely normal. He had clearly reached a point where he just accepted whatever Linda did and didn't fight it anymore. Pick your battles, and the battle of the living room coffin was not one he had chosen to fight. We stayed for dinner that day, which was as strange as always, and the entire time I couldn't stop glancing over at the coffin by the window. It was just so bizarre, so surreal. I kept thinking that surely this couldn't be real life. Surely I wasn't actually sitting in a room with someone's future coffin being used as furniture. But I was. It was real. The coffin was there, solid and undeniable, a constant reminder of mortality sitting right there next to the couch. After we left and were driving home, Tom and I didn't say much at first. We were both trying to process what we had just experienced. Finally, Tom broke the silence and said, "Well, that was weird." I agreed. Very weird. We laughed about it, because what else could we do? It was so absurd that laughter was really the only appropriate response. Over the following weeks and months, the coffin became just a part of going to visit Tom's father and Linda. It was always there in the living room, sometimes covered with the Afghan, sometimes with the lid open showing the blanket stored inside, sometimes with Linda herself lying on top of it taking a nap like it was the most normal thing in the world. And honestly, we kinda got used to it. Humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. We can get used to almost anything given enough time and exposure. The living room coffin became just another quirk of visiting Tom's parents. Along with the terrible food and the stories about bargain shopping and the mismatched decor and all the other oddities that came with Linda, the coffin just became part of the experience. When we had kids, they grew up knowing Grandma Linda and Grandpa Frank, and they grew up with the coffin being a normal part of Grandma's house. To them, it wasn't weird at all. It was just the way things were. Kids are even more adaptable than adults in some ways. They accept the world as they find it without questioning whether it matches up with how things are supposed to be. Our oldest, a girl named Emma, was probably about 5 when she first really understood what the coffin was for. We had been very careful not to make a big deal about it when the kids were around, just treating it like any other piece of furniture because we didn't want to scare them or make them uncomfortable at Grandma's house. But Emma was a smart kid, observant and curious. One day during a visit, she asked Grandma Linda what the big box was. Linda, never one to sugarcoat anything, explained matter-of-factly that it was a coffin. Emma asked what a coffin was. Linda explained that it's what people are buried in when they die, and that she had made this one for herself so she would have it ready when she needed it someday. I held my breath, waiting for Emma to be upset or scared, but she just nodded thoughtfully and said, "Oh, okay." Then she asked if she could help Grandma get the blankets out because she wanted to build a fort. Kids, man, they just roll with things in a way adults can't. My middle child, a boy named Jake, thought the whole thing was hilarious once he was old enough to understand it. He was maybe 7 or 8 when he really grasped the concept, and his reaction was to laugh and think it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. Grandma naps on her coffin. He thought it was great. He told all his friends at school about it. I got some interesting looks from other parents after that. Our youngest, another girl named Sophie, was probably the most matter-of-fact about it. When she was old enough to ask questions, she simply wanted to know if everyone had a coffin at their house. When we explained that no, most people don't keep coffins in their living room, she seemed genuinely puzzled about why not. If you're going to need one eventually anyway, her logic went, why not have it ready? She had clearly inherited some of Linda's practical, if unusual, way of thinking about things. The kids genuinely did think it was funny that Grandma would nap on her coffin. They would giggle about it on the way home from visits. Sometimes they would ask if Grandma was napping on the coffin today. It became sort of a running joke in our family, not in a mean way, but in an affectionate way. It was just part of what made Grandma Linda who she was. Linda eventually finished Frank's coffin too. It joined hers in the living room for a while, which meant there were 2 coffins in that room for a period of time. 2. Most people don't have any coffins in their living room. Linda had 2. Frank's was stored in the garage after a while, though, because even Linda had to admit that 2 coffins in the living room was perhaps excessive. Plus, she needed the space for other things. Normal living room things, like the couch and the coffee table and the TV. In addition to the 1 coffin. Years went by. The coffins waited. Life continued. The kids grew up. Emma went off to college. Jake got his driver's license. Sophie started high school. Tom and I celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and all the normal milestones of life. And through it all, whenever we visited Tom's father and Linda, the coffin was there in the living room, a constant presence. Linda kept right on taking her naps on it. She would tell anyone who visited about how she had made it herself. She was proud of her handiwork, and honestly, she had a right to be. It really was a beautifully made coffin. The craftsmanship was excellent. It was just the location and purpose that were unusual. I got to the point where I barely noticed it anymore. It was just there, like the couch or the lamp or any other piece of furniture. Our brains are good at filtering out things that are consistently present, even if those things are objectively strange. The coffin in the living room became background noise in my mental landscape. Then, inevitably, the day came when the coffin had to be used for its original purpose. Frank passed away first. He had been declining for a while, his health getting worse gradually over several years. It wasn't a sudden shock, but it was still sad. He had been a good man, a kind father-in-law, a loving grandfather to our kids. We mourned him. Linda decided that he would be buried in the coffin she had made for him. the one that had been waiting in the garage all those years. It seemed fitting, in a way. She had made it with care, with the knowledge that one day it would hold her husband. And now that day had come. The funeral was small and simple the way Frank would have wanted it. When the pallbearers lifted the coffin to carry it, I noticed something. They were struggling. Not a little bit, either. They were really struggling. The coffin was heavy. Like, really heavy. Much heavier than a normal coffin. One of the pallbearers, Tom's cousin Mark, made a comment afterward about how that was the heaviest coffin he had ever carried, and he had been a pallbearer several times before. Linda had apparently built it to last. She had used solid, heavy wood, and had constructed it to be extremely sturdy and durable, which was admirable from a craftsmanship standpoint, but less admirable from a carrying it to the grave standpoint. Tom and I both thought about Linda's coffin, still sitting in the living room, made with the same heavy construction. When her time came, those pallbearers were going to have their work cut out for them too. After Frank's death, Linda lived alone in that house. We visited her regularly, checking on her and making sure she was okay. The coffin stayed in the living room. She still napped on it. She still used it to store blankets. It was still just part of the furniture as far as she was concerned. The kids, who were older now, Emma back from college for visits, Jake in college himself, Sophie getting ready to graduate high school, still got a kick out of it. They would share the story with their friends, with their significant others. Grandma Linda and her living room coffin became legendary. It was the kind of story that people didn't quite believe until they saw it with their own eyes. I brought friends to meet Linda a few times over the years. Their reactions were always priceless. They would walk into the living room, see the coffin, do a double take, and then try to act like everything was normal while shooting me confused looks. "Is that what I think it is?" their eyes would ask. "Yes," my eyes would reply. "Yes, it is." Linda didn't seem to notice or care about people's reactions. Or maybe she did notice and just didn't care. She was who she was, and she wasn't going to change for anyone's comfort. There was something almost admirable about that level of not caring what other people thought. More years passed. Linda got older, frailer. Her health started to decline just as Frank's had. We knew the day was coming when she too would pass on, and when that day came, the coffin in the living room would finally be used for what it had been built for all those years ago. That day came on a Tuesday. Linda had been in hospice care at home for a few weeks. We had all said our goodbyes. The kids had come to see her one last time. She passed peacefully in her sleep, which was a blessing. The funeral arrangements were already made, of course. Linda had planned everything years in advance. She had picked out the dress she wanted to be buried in. She had written down exactly what she wanted for the service. And of course, she had made it very clear that she wanted to be buried in the coffin she had made herself. So the coffin that had sat in that living room for so many years, that had served as a blanket chest and a napping spot and a conversation piece and a family legend, was finally going to serve its original purpose. The funeral home came to pick up Linda's body and the coffin. I wasn't there for that, but Tom was. He told me later that it was surreal to watch them carry that coffin out of the house. The coffin that had been such a fixture in that room for so long. The space where it had been looked empty and strange without it. The funeral was larger than Frank's had been. Linda had outlived him by several years and had made friends and acquaintances during that time. People came to pay their respects, and of course, many of them had heard the story of Linda's homemade coffin. Some had even seen it during visits to her home. When the pallbearers carried Linda's coffin, they had the same experience that Frank's pallbearers had had. The thing was incredibly heavy. I saw them straining under the weight. I heard one of them mutter something under his breath about how they were going to need a chiropractor after this. During the service, the pastor mentioned Linda's many hobbies and interests over the years. He mentioned her woodworking skills in particular, and how she had crafted beautiful pieces. He didn't specifically mention the coffin, but everyone there knew. We all knew that Linda was being laid to rest in something she had made with her own hands years before she would need it. There was something poetic about that, in a way. Something that spoke to Linda's unusual but undeniable spirit. She had lived life on her own terms, unconcerned with what anyone else thought was normal or appropriate. She had taken pride in her work and in her ability to save money and be practical, even when that practicality led to keeping a coffin in the living room. After the funeral, we had to clean out Linda's house. Tom and his siblings went through everything, deciding what to keep and what to donate and what to throw away. The house had accumulated a lot of stuff over the years. Linda had been a collector of bargains, and she had saved everything. In the living room, there was a rectangular space where the coffin had been. The carpet was slightly less faded there, protected from the sun by the coffin that had blocked the window for so many years. We all stood and looked at that space, remembering. Emma, who was there helping clean, took a picture of the empty space. She said she wanted to remember it, the spot where Grandma's coffin had been, the place that had been such a weird but integral part of her childhood visits to this house. Jake joked that we should get a plaque made. "Here sat the coffin," it would say, a memorial to one of the strangest things any of us had ever experienced in a family home. Sophie just shook her head and laughed. She said that when she had kids someday, they would never believe the story about their great-grandmother who kept her coffin in the living room and napped on it. It would sound too crazy to be true, but it was true. We all lived it. We all saw it with our own eyes, year after year. The coffin in the living room became a part of our family's story, a part of our shared history. It was weird and unusual and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also uniquely Linda. Looking back now, years after both Linda and Frank have passed, I can appreciate the coffin situation more than I did at the time. While it was happening, it just seemed bizarre, uncomfortable, something to endure during visits and laugh about afterward. But now I see it differently. Linda was many things. She was cheap to the point of being ridiculous. She was odd in her thinking and her approach to life. She made terrible food and gave terrible gifts and did things that made no sense to anyone but her. But she was also practical in her own way. She saw something that would eventually be needed, and she made it herself. She took pride in her work. She didn't let social norms or other people's opinions dictate how she lived her life. She did what she thought was right and sensible, and she didn't apologize for it. And honestly, when you think about it, she saved money. A lot of money. Coffins are expensive, sometimes thousands and thousands of dollars. Linda made 2 of them for the cost of materials and her own time and labor. From a purely financial standpoint, it was actually smart. It was just the execution that was weird. Most people who build their own coffins probably store them in a garage or shed or somewhere out of sight. They don't put them in the living room. They definitely don't nap on them. But that was Linda. She didn't do things the way most people would. She did them her way, and her way involved a coffin in the living room that doubled as furniture and a napping spot. The kids still tell the story. They tell it to their friends, their coworkers, their significant others. It always gets a reaction. People's eyes get wide, they lean in, they want to hear more details. Is this real, they ask. Did this really happen? Yes, we assure them. Yes, it really happened. We have witnesses, all of us saw it. The living room coffin was real. And then they usually laugh, because what else can you do? It's such an absurd story, such a strange and unusual thing, the kind of thing that sounds made up but is actually true. Our family has a lot of stories about Linda, the weird gifts, the terrible cooking, the strange ideas and odd behaviors, but the coffin story is the one that has really endured. It's the one that defines Linda in people's minds. When Emma got married a few years ago, she included a memorial table at her wedding with photos of loved ones who had passed. She put up a picture of Linda, and next to it she put a small plaque that said Linda believed in being prepared. Everyone who knew the story laughed when they saw it. When Jake bought his first house, he joked about putting a coffin in the living room for old time's sake. His girlfriend at the time did not find this nearly as funny as he did. She told him in no uncertain terms that if he brought a coffin into their house, she would be moving out. He assured her he was kidding. Mostly. Sophie is studying to be a therapist, and she says that Linda would have made an interesting case study. A woman who seemed to have no awareness or concern about social norms, who lived entirely according to her own logic and priorities, who genuinely didn't understand why other people found her behavior strange. I think Sophie's right. Linda would have been fascinating to study from a psychological perspective. She was also just a person, a unique, odd, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately memorable person who left an impression on everyone who knew her. The coffins were, in the end, beautiful pieces of work. Linda had real skill as a woodworker. The craftsmanship was excellent. They were sturdy and well-made, and exactly what she wanted them to be. They were just also in the living room. One of them, for years, being napped on. And that's what makes the story. That's what makes it memorable. Not that Linda made her own coffin, which is unusual but not unheard of, but that she put it in the living room, that she used it as furniture, that she treated it like a normal, everyday object instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, it was a bit weird to have a coffin on display in your home. I miss Linda sometimes, in a strange way. I didn't always enjoy her company when she was alive. She could be difficult and frustrating, and her food was genuinely terrible. But she was never boring. She always gave us something to talk about. And in a world that often feels too concerned with appearances and fitting in and doing what everyone else does, there was something refreshing about Linda's complete disregard for all of that. She did what she wanted. She lived her life her way. And if that meant having a coffin in the living room, then so be it. That was her choice, and she stood by it. The pallbearers who carried those heavy coffins probably don't remember Linda fondly. Their backs probably still hurt when they think about it. But they have a story too. A story about the heaviest coffins they ever carried, made by a woman who believed in doing things thoroughly and well, even if that meant making them unnecessarily heavy. My kids have their story. Their friends have the second-hand version. And now, somehow, this strange chapter of our family history has become something we look back on with a mixture of disbelief and fondness. Because yes, it was weird. Incredibly weird. Undeniably weird. But it was also uniquely ours. Our family's strange story that no one else can claim. And somewhere, I like to think Linda would be pleased that we're still talking about her coffin. She was proud of that coffin. She thought it was a smart, practical solution to an inevitable need. She probably would have loved knowing that it became legendary, even if the legend is based on how unusual it was to keep it in the living room. So here's to Linda and her living room coffins. Here's to doing things your own way, even when everyone thinks you're crazy. Here's to practical solutions that are also deeply weird. And here's to the stories that get passed down through families, getting funnier and more unbelievable with each retelling, even though they're completely true. The coffin in the living room is gone now. Linda is buried in it, just as she planned all those years ago when she first started building it. The house has been sold. That living room is someone else's living room now, probably decorated in a much more conventional way. But for us, for our family, that living room will always be the room with the coffin in it. The room where Grandma Linda kept her blankets and took her naps on her future final resting place. The room that was so weird and so memorable and so perfectly Linda. And honestly, I wouldn't change it. The story is too good. The memory is too unique. It's become part of who we are as a family, part of our shared history and identity. We're the family with the living room coffin story. And you know what? That's not the worst thing to be remembered for. Rest in peace, Linda. You were one of a kind, and your coffin was too. Next one story start now. The voice that came on the night of no moon. There are certain stories in every family that get told and retold, stories that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up no matter how many times you hear them. Stories that seem impossible but are sworn to be true by the people who live through them. In my family, we have one such story. It happened to my mother when she was just 15 years old, and even now, decades later, she still gets a distant look in her eyes when she talks about it. Her voice gets quieter, her hands tremble just slightly, and she always ends by saying the same thing. She still doesn't know what she heard that night, and she's not sure she wants to know. Let me take you back to that time to help you understand the full picture of what happened. My mother was 15 years old and living with her parents and grandmother in a small town. Life was simple back then. Without all the technology and distractions we have now, no smartphones to scroll through, no internet to waste time on, just books and family and the rhythm of daily life that moved at a slower, quieter pace. My mother was a good student. She took her studies seriously because she knew that education was her ticket to a better life. Her parents worked hard to give her opportunities they never had, and she didn't want to disappoint them. So when exams came around, she studied with dedication and focus, often staying up late into the night to make sure she had covered all the material. The house they lived in was a traditional-style home with a balcony that faced the street. It wasn't a fancy balcony, just a simple concrete platform with a railing. But it was my mother's favorite place to study. During the day, she could watch the world go by while she reviewed her notes. At night, when the air was cooler and the neighborhood was quiet, she could focus without any distractions. Her grandmother lived with them, sharing a room with my mother. She was a kind woman, traditional in her beliefs and practices, who followed all the old customs and knew all the old stories. She believed in things that modern people might laugh at. She paid attention to the calendar, to the phases of the moon, to the holy days and the inauspicious days. She knew which days were good for starting new projects and which days you should stay home, be careful. My mother, being 15 and focused on her modern education, didn't pay as much attention to these things. She knew about them, of course. Everyone in the community did. But she didn't always remember to check the calendar or think about what phase the moon was in. She was more concerned with chemistry formulas and history dates and math problems. The night this happened was the night before an important exam. My mother had been studying for days, but she wanted one more good review session to make sure everything was fresh in her mind. She gathered her books and notes and went out to the balcony like she always did, settling into her usual spot with her materials spread around her. It was dark outside, very dark. She noticed this in a distant way, the kind of noticing where you register something but don't really think about it. The darkness seemed deeper than usual, thicker somehow, like it was pressing in from all sides. But she didn't think much of it. She just turned on the small light she used for studying and bent over her books. The night was quiet in the way that late nights in small towns are quiet. Most people were asleep. The shops were closed. The streets were empty. There was just the occasional sound of leaves rustling in the breeze and maybe a dog barking in the distance. The kind of quiet that can be peaceful or unsettling depending on your mood. My mother studied for hours, going through her notes page by page, making sure she understood everything. She was tired. Her eyes felt heavy. Her mind was starting to get foggy with exhaustion. But she pushed through because she wanted to do well on this exam. She wanted to make her parents proud. At some point during her studying, she needed to organize some of her papers. She had loose sheets of notes that needed to be kept together, so she reached for a stapler. It was a simple metal stapler, the kind you can find in any office or school. She had used it hundreds of times before without any problems. But exhaustion makes you clumsy. Exhaustion makes your hands less steady and your reflexes slower. She picked up the stapler and positioned it over the papers, but her aim was off. Instead of stapling the papers together, she stapled her own hand. The pain was immediate and sharp. The metal staple punctured her skin and drove into her flesh. She gasped and pulled her hand back, seeing the staple embedded in her skin. Blood began to well up around it, warm and dark red, trickling down her palm and dripping onto her books and papers. Most people would have panicked at this point. Most people would have cried out or called for help, or at the very least would have immediately tried to remove the staple and bandage the wound. But my mother was exhausted and in shock. She stared at her bleeding hand for a moment, watching the blood drip, and her tired brain just couldn't quite process what had happened. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She didn't call for her grandmother or her parents. Instead, in a strange, detached way, she simply started gathering up her books and papers. She closed her notebooks, careful not to get too much blood on them. She stacked everything neatly. She turned off the light. And then, still holding her bleeding hand, she went inside. The staple was still in her hand. The blood was still flowing, but she just ignored it. She walked quietly through the house, not wanting to wake anyone, and went to the room she shared with her grandmother. Her grandmother was already asleep, breathing softly in the darkness. My mother climbed into her own bed, pulled the covers over herself, and lay there with her bleeding hand tucked against her chest. The pain was there, throbbing and insistent, but somehow it felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. She was so tired that even the pain couldn't keep her fully alert. Her eyes started to close. Sleep started to pull at her, dragging her down into darkness. She was just on the edge of sleep, in that strange twilight state where you're not quite awake and not quite asleep, when she heard it. A voice, coming from outside, from the direction of the balcony where she had just been sitting. It was a whisper, but somehow it carried clearly through the night air and through the walls of the house. 2 words, repeated over and over. 2 simple, chilling words. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. The voice was strange. Not quite male, not quite female, not quite young, not quite old. It had a quality to it that was hard to describe, something that made the words feel wrong somehow, like they were coming from something that was trying to sound human but wasn't quite managing it. My mother's eyes snapped open. Her heart started pounding. The sleepiness that had been pulling at her vanished in an instant, replaced by cold, sharp fear. She lay there in the darkness, listening to that voice whisper those same words again and again. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. Her mind raced. Who was out there? Why were they saying that? What did they want? The balcony was on the 2nd floor. It wasn't easy to access from the street. Someone would have had to climb up to get there. But the voice didn't sound like it was coming from the balcony exactly. It sounded like it was coming from outside, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the house. She turned to her grandmother, sleeping peacefully beside her. My mother's voice came out as a whisper, speaking in their mother tongue, asking her grandmother if she had heard the voice. Did you hear that? Did you hear someone speaking? Her grandmother stirred slightly, not fully waking, and mumbled back in a sleepy voice. Hear what? What are you talking about? But the voice continued, still whispering those same words, still saying I'm hungry over and over again, in that strange, not quite right tone. My mother lay there frozen with fear. Her grandmother hadn't heard it, or if she had heard it, she had dismissed it as part of a dream. But my mother was wide awake now, and she could hear it clearly. The voice was real. It was actually there, whispering in the darkness outside their house. She didn't know what to do. Should she wake her grandmother? Should she wake her parents? Should she get up and look outside to see who or what was making that sound? Or should she just hide under the covers and hope it went away? She chose the last option. She pulled the blanket over her head, covering herself completely, trying to block out the sound of that whispering voice. She squeezed her eyes shut and put her hands over her ears, pressing hard, trying to make it stop. Her bleeding hand throbbed with pain, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was that voice, whispering endlessly in the darkness. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. Time seemed to stretch out forever. She didn't know how long she lay there under the covers, hiding like a child afraid of monsters. Minutes? Hours? It was impossible to tell. Eventually, exhaustion and fear combined to pull her into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of shadows and whispers and things moving in the darkness just beyond her vision. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window. The night was over. The darkness was gone. The voice had stopped. Everything seemed normal again, in the way that things always seem normal in the light of day. Night terrors and strange experiences always feel less real when the sun is shining. My mother sat up in bed, feeling groggy and disoriented. Her hand throbbed, and she looked down to see dried blood on her palm and fingers. The staple was still there, embedded in her skin. She carefully pulled it out, wincing at the fresh stab of pain, and examined the small wound. It wasn't too bad, really. It would heal fine. She wrapped it with a piece of cloth and got out of bed. Her grandmother was already up, moving around the house doing her morning routines. My mother went to the bathroom to brush her teeth and wash her face, trying to shake off the strange feelings from the night before. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe she had imagined the voice. Maybe exhaustion and stress about the exam had made her hear things that weren't really there. She was standing at the sink, brushing her teeth, when her grandmother came rushing in. The old woman's face was concerned, her brow furrowed with worry. She told my mother that she had been out on the balcony and had found drops of blood. Quite a lot of blood, actually, scattered across the floor of the balcony. Her grandmother assumed it was from a cat. Cats often fought with rats in the neighborhood, and sometimes these fights got bloody. It wasn't uncommon to find evidence of these nighttime battles in the morning, so she naturally assumed that was what had happened, that a cat had caught and killed a rat out on their balcony during the night. My mother listened to this explanation and realized her grandmother didn't know about the stapler accident. She explained what had really happened, showing her grandmother the wound on her hand. "It was me," she said. "I hurt my finger with the stapler last night. That's my blood on the balcony." Her grandmother's reaction was immediate and strong. The old woman's eyes went wide with shock and what looked like fear. She grabbed my mother's hand, examining the wound, and then she shouted. Actually shouted, which was unusual for her. "On Amavasya night? On Amavasya night you did this? What were you thinking? Why were you out there with a stapler on Amavasya night?" My mother didn't understand at first. She looked at her grandmother in confusion. What did it matter what night it was? What difference did that make? It was just an accident. She had stapled her hand by mistake because she was tired. What did the moon have to do with anything? But then, slowly, understanding began to dawn. Amavasya, the no-moon night. The darkest night of the lunar month, when the moon is completely hidden and the sky is at its darkest. The night that her grandmother and others in the community considered dangerous. The night when the barriers between worlds were thin and things that usually stayed hidden could sometimes cross over. My mother felt a chill run down her spine. She had been out on the balcony on Amavasya night. She had spilled her blood on Amavasya night. And then she had heard that voice whispering in the darkness. The pieces started to fit together in her mind, forming a picture that she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. The blood, the darkness of the no-moon night, the strange voice calling out that it was hungry. Her grandmother seemed to be thinking along the same lines. The old woman's face had gone pale. She asked my mother if anything else had happened during the night. Had she seen anything? Heard anything? My mother hesitated, then told her about the voice, about the whispering that had said, "I'm hungry," over and over again. Her grandmother's reaction confirmed my mother's worst fears. The old woman made a sound of distress and began muttering prayers under her breath. She grabbed my mother's hand again, examining the wound more closely, asking exactly when it had happened, and exactly how much blood had been spilled. The old woman explained what my mother had begun to suspect. On Amavasya night, the darkest night, when there is no moon to light the world, certain things become more active. Certain entities that normally stay in their own realm can sometimes sense opportunities in ours. And blood, fresh blood spilled on such a night, can act like a beacon, like a signal, like an invitation. My mother felt sick. She thought about sitting out on that dark balcony, bleeding, while something in the darkness sensed the blood and came closer. She thought about that voice whispering that it was hungry. Hungry for what? For blood? For something else? She didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her grandmother performed a small purification ritual, burning herbs and reciting prayers, walking through the house and especially focusing on the balcony area. She insisted that my mother stay inside for the rest of the day, even though it was the day of her exam. But my mother couldn't stay home. She had studied too hard, prepared too much. She had to take that exam. She went to school, but she couldn't focus. She kept thinking about the night before, about the darkness, about the blood, about the voice. She took her exam in a daze, barely remembering what questions were asked or what answers she gave. When she came home, her grandmother was waiting with more prayers and more rituals. For days afterward, my mother felt like something was watching her, especially at night, especially when it was dark. She would lie in bed and feel eyes on her, feel a presence nearby, feel something waiting just beyond her ability to see or hear it. She stopped studying on the balcony. She stopped going outside after dark. She became careful about not cutting herself or bleeding, especially as the moon waned toward darkness each month. Her grandmother told her that she had been lucky, that whatever had been drawn by the blood had only called out, had only whispered. It could have been worse. It could have done more. But the fact that my mother had gone inside quickly, had covered herself with the blanket, had essentially hidden herself away, had probably saved her from something worse. The old woman also said that the entity, whatever it was, had probably been confused. It had been drawn by the blood, had come expecting one thing, but had found a young girl instead. The voice saying "I'm hungry" might have been its way of expressing frustration or confusion, or even, possibly, a warning that it could have taken what it wanted but had chosen not to, this time. My mother asked her grandmother what it might have looked like, this thing that whispered in the darkness. But her grandmother wouldn't say. She said that some knowledge is dangerous, that some things are better left unknown. She said that trying to picture it, trying to imagine it, might give it more power somehow, might make it more real, might make it easier for it to come back. So my mother never learned what the thing looked like. She never learned exactly what it was or what it wanted or why it had been drawn to her balcony that night. All she knew was the voice, whispering those two words over and over in the darkness. "I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry." As the years passed, my mother tried to rationalize it. She told herself it might have been a homeless person on the street below, someone actually hungry who had been calling out for food. She told herself it might have been exhaustion and stress making her hear things that weren't real. She told herself it might have been a dream that felt vivid enough to seem like reality. But deep down she never quite believed these rational explanations, because she remembered the quality of that voice too clearly. The way it sounded not quite human. The way it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The way her grandmother had reacted when she learned about the blood on Amavasya night. The way the whole experience felt wrong in a way that normal experiences don't feel wrong. She told this story to my father before they got married, wanting him to know about this strange thing that had happened to her. My father listened and didn't laugh or dismiss it. He came from a similar background, understood similar beliefs. He told her that his own grandmother had similar stories, had similar warnings about certain nights and certain practices. When my mother had children of her own, she was careful to pass on certain warnings. She told us not to spill blood carelessly, especially on certain nights. She told us to pay attention to the lunar calendar, to be aware of when Amavasya came around. She told us that there are things in the world that we don't fully understand, and that just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it isn't real. As a child, I found the story scary but also exciting. It was like having a real ghost story in my own family. As a teenager, I was skeptical. I thought my mother must have been dreaming or hallucinating from exhaustion. As an adult, I don't know what to think, because I've done research. I've read about Amavasya in Hindu tradition and how it's considered an inauspicious time. I've read about how blood has been considered significant in various spiritual and occult traditions across many cultures. I've read accounts from other people who claim to have experienced strange things on dark nights, who talk about voices and presences and feelings of being watched. I've also learned that the human brain can play tricks on us, especially when we're tired or stressed or afraid. That we can experience auditory hallucinations under certain conditions. That we can convince ourselves we've heard or seen things that weren't really there. That there are often rational explanations for seemingly supernatural experiences. But I've also experienced enough strange things in my own life to know that the world is bigger and more mysterious than we sometimes want to admit. I've been in places that felt wrong for no reason I could name. I've had dreams that seemed to predict future events. I've felt presences that I couldn't see or explain. So when my mother tells this story, as she still does sometimes when the conversation turns to unexplained experiences or family history, I listen with an open mind. I don't dismiss it as impossible. I don't insist it must have been a dream or hallucination. I simply accept that it was her experience, that it was real to her, and that she has carried it with her for all these years. The story has become part of our family lore. When Amavasya comes around, someone usually mentions it. We joke about being careful with staplers. We make sure the younger generation knows the story. It's become a teaching tool in a way to pass on cultural knowledge and awareness about dates and traditions that might otherwise be forgotten. My mother still won't go out on dark balconies at night. Even now, decades later, she gets uncomfortable if she has to be outside when there's no moon. She says she doesn't think the thing that whispered to her that night is still watching or waiting for her. But she also says she doesn't want to take any chances. She doesn't want to remind it that she exists. She doesn't want to give it any reason to come back. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she had gotten up that night. If she had gone to the window or stepped out onto the balcony to see who or what was speaking. Would she have seen something? Would something have happened to her? Or would there have been nothing there, just empty darkness and the wind? I'm glad she didn't look. I'm glad she hid under her blanket and waited for morning. Because even if it was nothing, even if there was a rational explanation, there's a part of me that believes it might have been something that was hungry, something that had been drawn by blood spilled on the darkest night, something that might have taken her if she had given it the opportunity. The mystery remains unsolved. We don't know whose voice it was. We don't know why it only happened on that one Amavasya night and never again. We don't know what the entity looked like, if there even was an entity. We don't know if it was something supernatural or something that could be explained by science and psychology, but we do know that my mother heard it. We know that she experienced something that frightened her deeply and stayed with her for the rest of her life. We know that the timing with the blood and the darkness and the no moon night was too coincidental to completely dismiss. And we know that she was 15 years old, just a girl trying to study for an exam, who accidentally hurt herself and then heard something whisper in the darkness that it was hungry. That's the simple truth of what happened, stripped of all analysis and rationalization and attempts to explain it away. Sometimes the world presents us with experiences that resist explanation. Sometimes things happen that don't fit neatly into our understanding of how reality works. Sometimes we encounter the unknown and walk away changed by it, carrying the memory with us forever. This is one of those stories, a mystery that will probably never be solved, a question that will probably never be answered, a moment when something broke through the normal routine of life and left an impression that time cannot erase. My mother is an old woman now. Her grandmother passed away many years ago. The house with the balcony is gone, demolished to make way for new construction. The people who might have offered explanations or insights have all moved on or passed on themselves. But the story remains, the memory remains. And on Amavasya nights, when the moon is hidden and the world is at its darkest, my mother still remembers. She remembers the blood dripping from her hand. She remembers the voice whispering in the darkness. She remembers the fear and the mystery and the feeling that something unknown was very close. And she teaches her children and grandchildren to be careful on such nights. To be aware, to pay attention, because whether it was something supernatural or something that can be explained, whether it was real or imagined, whether it was dangerous or harmless, it was an experience that mattered, an experience that shaped her understanding of the world and its mysteries. That's the power of the unknown. It changes us. It makes us question our assumptions. It reminds us that for all our knowledge and understanding, there are still things we cannot fully explain. There are still voices in the darkness that whisper things we cannot quite understand. There are still mysteries waiting in the night. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, when there is no moon to light the world, those mysteries come a little bit closer. Close enough to whisper. Close enough to be heard. Close enough to remind us that we are not alone in this world, and that not everything that shares it with us is friendly or understandable or safe. My mother heard one of those mysteries on the night she was 15, and now you've heard about it too. Make of it what you will, believe it or don't believe, explain it away or accept it as unexplainable. But maybe, just maybe, on the next Amavasya night, when the moon is hidden and the darkness is deep, you'll think twice before going out alone. You'll be a little more careful if you happen to cut yourself. You'll listen a little more closely to the sounds of the night. And if you hear a voice whispering in the darkness, a voice that sounds not quite right saying it's hungry, maybe you'll remember this story. And maybe you'll do what my mother did. Go inside, hide under the covers, wait for morning. Because some things are better left in the darkness where they belong. Next one's story start now. The soldier who never stopped serving. There are ghost stories. And then there are stories so strange and so well documented that they make you question everything you think you know about life, death, and the space between them. This is one of those stories. It's the story of a soldier who died over 50 years ago but continued to serve his country. A soldier who draws a salary, goes on leave, gets promoted, and patrols a dangerous mountain border. A soldier whose warnings have saved lives and whose presence is acknowledged not just by his own army, but by the enemy across the border. This is the story of Lance Naik Harbhajan Singh, the ghost soldier of Nathula. Before we get to the impossible parts of this story, let me tell you about the man himself. Harbhajan Singh was a regular soldier in the Indian Army, serving with the 23rd Punjab Regiment. He wasn't a general or a war hero with medals covering his chest. He was just a good soldier doing his duty. The kind of man who shows up every day and does his job without complaint. He was a Sikh, which meant he wore a turban and kept his beard as part of his faith. He came from a small village in Punjab, and like many young men from that region, he had joined the army to serve his country and support his family. In 1968, Harbhajan Singh was posted to one of the most dangerous and difficult assignments any soldier could receive. He was sent to Nathula, a mountain pass in the Himalayas that sits on the border between India and China. This isn't just any border. This is one of the highest and most dangerous borders in the world, where soldiers face not just the threat of enemy action, but also the constant danger of extreme weather, avalanches, and the thin air of high altitude that makes every task exhausting. Nathula sits at an elevation of over 14,000 feet above sea level. The weather there is brutal. Temperatures drop far below freezing, snow falls heavily and often. Winds whip across the mountains with enough force to knock a man off his feet. Visibility can drop to almost nothing in minutes when a storm rolls in. And always, there is the danger of avalanches. Massive walls of snow that can come thundering down the mountainside without warning, burying everything in their path. Soldiers stationed at Nathula live in harsh conditions. They deal with frostbite and altitude sickness. They struggle to stay warm in bunkers and tents that provide minimal protection from the cold. They eat simple rations because fresh food is hard to transport to such a remote location. They spend weeks or months at a time in this frozen landscape, far from their families and the comforts of normal life. And they do all this while remaining alert and ready, because the Chinese army is just across the border, watching and waiting. Harbhajan Singh was patrolling this dangerous border when tragedy struck. According to the official records, on the 4th of October in 1968, he was caught in an avalanche. One moment he was there doing his duty, walking his patrol route through the snow and ice. The next moment, thousands of tons of snow came crashing down the mountain, sweeping him away. His fellow soldiers searched for him. They dug through the snow, calling his name, hoping against hope that they might find him alive in some pocket of air trapped beneath the surface. But they found nothing. The avalanche had taken him completely. His body was never recovered. The snow and ice had claimed him, as they had claimed other soldiers before him and would claim others after him. The army did what armies do in such situations. They declared Lance Naik Harbhajan Singh killed in action. They notified his family. They held a memorial service. They added his name to the list of soldiers who had given their lives for their country. And then, because the border still needed guarding and life moves on even in the face of death, they continued with their duties. But Harbhajan Singh, it seems, was not done with his duties. A few weeks after his death, something strange started happening. One of Harbhajan Singh's fellow soldiers, a man who had served with him and had been part of the search party that looked for his body, had a dream. In the dream, Harbhajan Singh appeared to him. He looked exactly as he had in life, wearing his uniform, his turban neatly tied, his beard trimmed and tidy. He spoke to the soldier, and his message was simple but urgent. He said that he was not dead. He was still alive and still serving. He wanted to be considered as an active soldier, not as someone who had died. The soldier woke up confused and disturbed. It had been such a vivid dream, so real and detailed. But dreams are just dreams, right? His friend was dead, buried under tons of snow somewhere on the mountain. The dream was probably just his mind processing grief and loss. He told himself this and tried to push the dream out of his mind, but the dream came back. Night after night, Harbhajan Singh appeared in this soldier's sleep, repeating the same message: "I am not dead. I am still serving. Consider me alive." The soldier started to lose sleep. He became anxious and worried. He mentioned the dreams to a few of his fellow soldiers, but they told him not to worry about it. Grief affects people in strange ways, they said. The dreams would stop eventually. Then other soldiers started having the same dream. Not just one or two, but many of them. Men who had known Harbhajan Singh and men who had never met him. Men who slept in different bunkers and had no way of coordinating their stories. All of them reported the same thing. Harbhajan Singh was appearing in their dreams, wearing his uniform, looking healthy and solid, and very much alive. And he was giving them all the same message. He was not dead. He was still there. He was still serving. He wanted to be recognized as an active soldier. The soldiers began to talk among themselves. This was beyond strange. This was impossible. But how could so many people be having the exact same dream about the exact same message? It couldn't be coincidence. It couldn't be mass hysteria. Something was happening that they couldn't explain. The dream spread beyond the regular soldiers to the officers. A captain had the dream. A major had the dream. They too saw Harbhajan Singh clear as day delivering his message. The officers tried to maintain order and discipline, tried to come up with rational explanations, but they couldn't ignore what was happening. The entire unit was being affected by these dreams. Then things escalated. Harbhajan Singh stopped just appearing in dreams. Soldiers on patrol started reporting that they saw him, not as a ghost or a transparent figure, but as a solid, real person. They would be walking their patrol routes in the snow and ice, and they would see a Sikh soldier ahead of them or behind them. When they got closer to investigate, he would be gone, disappeared into the mist or around a corner. But they had seen him clearly enough to describe him, and the description always matched Harbhajan Singh. Equipment started moving on its own. Soldiers would set up their gear in specific places, only to find it moved to different locations when they returned. Tea would be found brewing in the cookhouse when no one had been there to make it. Footprints would appear in fresh snow, the distinctive marks of military boots, in areas where no one had walked. The situation became impossible to ignore. The commanding officers had to make a decision. They could dismiss all of this as superstition and order the soldiers to stop talking about it. Or they could accept that something unexplainable was happening and deal with it accordingly. They chose the second option. In an unprecedented move, the Indian Army officially declared Lance Naik Harbhajan Singh to be alive and still in active service, despite the fact that he had been killed in an avalanche and his body had never been found. This wasn't done quietly or as a joke. This was an official military decision, recorded in documents and implemented in practice. What did this mean in practical terms? It meant that Harbhajan Singh was put back on the active duty roster. He was assigned to his old unit, he was given his old duties, and he began receiving all the benefits and treatment of an active soldier. He draws a salary. Every month, the Indian Army deposits money into an account in the name of Lance Naik Harbhajan Singh. This isn't a token amount. It's a full military salary, the same amount any soldier of his rank would receive. The money is managed by the Army and used to maintain a memorial to him and support related activities. He goes on leave, twice a year like all soldiers serving in those difficult mountain posts. Harbhajan Singh is granted leave to visit his home village in Punjab. Now here's where things get really interesting. When it's time for his leave, the Army follows proper procedures. They reserve a berth on the train in his name. A ticket is booked for Lance Naik Harbhajan Singh, traveling from the military base to his home village. 2 orderlies are assigned to accompany him on the journey, just as they would accompany any soldier traveling with important military status. The train reservation is real. Railway records show the booking. The seat is kept empty throughout the journey. The orderlies board the train and travel in the compartment, guarding the empty berth that is reserved for their supernatural companion. When the train reaches a station about 15 miles from Harbhajan Singh's village, a military vehicle is waiting. The vehicle is there to pick up Harbhajan Singh and transport him the rest of the way. The vehicle drives to the regimental Gurdwara, the Sikh temple associated with the military unit. There, arrangements have been made for Harbhajan Singh to spend the night. The temple is prepared, food is laid out, a bed is made. Everything is done exactly as it would be done for any soldier stopping to rest on his journey home. The next morning, the vehicle continues to his village, where his family home is maintained as a memorial. This happens twice a year, every year. The army goes through all these procedures with complete seriousness. This isn't a symbolic gesture or a tradition done half-heartedly. This is treated as a real military operation, with orders issued, resources allocated, and reports filed. But it gets even stranger. Harbhajan Singh didn't just remain a lance naik. He got promoted. The army reviewed his service record, considered his years of faithful duty, and promoted him to the honorary rank of captain. Captain Harbhajan Singh, a dead man who became an officer. His promotion was official, documented, and recognized throughout the military hierarchy. Now let's talk about his duties. Remember, Harbhajan Singh isn't just receiving the benefits of being an active soldier. He's also expected to perform duties, and according to numerous reports from soldiers stationed at Nathu Allah, he does. There is a specific stretch of the border, a particularly dangerous and difficult section, that Harbhajan Singh patrols on his own. This isn't soldiers imagining things or telling stories. This is official military recognition. The patrol routes are planned with the understanding that Harbhajan Singh covers certain areas. When you look at the duty roster for border patrols, there are sections where fewer soldiers are assigned because, as everyone understands, Harbhajan Singh is handling that area. Soldiers report seeing him on patrol. Not in dreams this time, but while they're awake and on duty themselves. They describe seeing a Sikh soldier walking the perimeter, checking the fences, watching the border. When they report back to their officers, the officers nod and note in the log that Harbhajan Singh was observed on duty. This becomes part of the official record. But Harbhajan Singh does more than just walk patrols. He provides warnings. Specifically, he warns about avalanches. Remember, he died in an avalanche, so perhaps he has a special understanding of the danger. Soldiers stationed at Nathullah report that when an avalanche is coming, they receive warnings. Sometimes it's a feeling of unease that sweeps through the camp. Sometimes it's equipment moved in ways that draw attention to dangerous areas. Sometimes it's dreams where Harbhajan Singh appears and explicitly tells soldiers to move to safety or avoid certain areas. These warnings have been documented as accurate. On multiple occasions, soldiers have reported receiving warnings attributed to Harbhajan Singh, have moved or taken precautions, and then witnessed avalanches occurring exactly where and when the warning suggested. Lives have been saved because of these warnings. The Army takes them seriously. When signs of a potential warning appear, officers order their men to take appropriate precautions. Harbhajan Singh has apparently promised the soldiers at Nathuala that they will always have 72 hours warning before any major incident, any attack, any natural disaster, any serious danger. 72 hours notice, that's his guarantee to them. And according to the soldiers who serve there, he has kept that promise. They trust him, they rely on him. He's become a part of their defense system, an invisible but very real guardian watching over them. When Harbhajan Singh goes on leave, things change at the border. The Army has to deploy additional troops to cover the areas he normally patrols. More soldiers are needed because they're covering duties that one supernatural soldier was handling on his own. The extra deployment is planned in advance, coordinated with his leave schedule, and treated as a routine military operation. When he returns from leave, and the return date is always November 15th, the extra troops are withdrawn. The patrol assignments go back to normal. The stretch of border that Harbhajan Singh watches is returned to his care, and soldiers report seeing him again, back on duty, resuming his endless watch. A shrine was built in his honor at the Nathula post. It's not hidden away or kept secret. It's a prominent structure where soldiers stop to pay their respects. The shrine contains his photograph, his belongings that were recovered before his death, and other memorial items. But it's not treated like a memorial to a dead soldier. It's treated more like the home of an active soldier who happens to be on duty most of the time. Fresh food is offered there. His uniform is kept clean and ready. Everything is maintained as if he might walk in at any moment. Soldiers report that they feel his presence at the shrine. They say that when they visit to pay respects or ask for protection, they feel like someone is there listening. They leave offerings and find them moved or changed in ways that suggest someone interacted with them. They ask for help or guidance and report receiving answers through dreams or intuition, or strange coincidences that help them solve their problems. But here's perhaps the most remarkable part of this whole story. The Chinese know about Harbhajan Singh. The Chinese military stationed on their side of the border at Nathula are aware of the ghost soldier who patrols the Indian side. When border meetings are held, which happen periodically as part of maintaining peace and communication between the two sides, the Chinese officers set aside a chair for Harbhajan Singh. They know he's supposed to be at these meetings as a representative of the Indian side. They acknowledge his presence. They include him in the proceedings. Chinese soldiers have reported to their own officers that they see a Sikh soldier patrolling alone on the Indian side of the border. Just one soldier, walking by himself through areas where it would normally take several soldiers to maintain adequate security. They describe him in detail. Tall, wearing a turban, carrying himself with military bearing. The descriptions match Harbhajan Singh. The Chinese don't mock this or dismiss it. They accept it as part of the reality of that border posting. They've incorporated the knowledge of the ghost soldier into their own understanding of the situation at Nathula. When they plan their activities or discuss border security, they account for the fact that the Indian side has this supernatural guardian watching over it. Think about what this means. Two armies representing two different nations that have had conflicts and tensions. Both acknowledge and respect the presence of a ghost soldier. Both make accommodations for him in their operations and procedures. Both treat him as a real factor in the complex dynamics of border security. Over the years, stories about Harbhajan Singh have spread throughout the Indian Army and beyond. Soldiers from other units who have never served at Nathula know about him. Officers being assigned to that posting are briefed about him as part of their orientation. New soldiers arriving at the border are told about the ghost captain who helps protect them. The Indian government and military have never officially confirmed all the details of this story in public statements. They maintain a certain level of official discretion. But they also haven't denied it. The practices continue, the salary continues to be paid. The leave arrangements continue to be made. The promotions and recognitions continue to be awarded. All of this happens through official channels with documentation and procedures. Journalists and researchers who have investigated this story have found evidence supporting many of its elements. Railway records showing reserve tickets in Harbhajan Singh's name. Military documents referring to his continued service, testimony from dozens of soldiers who have served at Nathula and who swear that everything they've been told about the ghost soldier is true based on their own experiences. Some people try to explain this rationally. They say it's a case of mass suggestion, where belief in the ghost soldier creates experiences that seem to confirm his presence. They argue that the army is simply maintaining a tradition or superstition to boost morale among soldiers serving in difficult conditions. They suggest that any sightings can be explained by misidentification in the harsh weather conditions of the high Himalayas. But these rational explanations struggle to account for all the details. How do you explain the Chinese seeing the same soldier? How do you explain the accurate avalanche warnings? How do you explain the physical objects that move or the consistent descriptions from people who have never met each other? How do you explain an institution as practical and no-nonsense as a modern army maintaining elaborate procedures for a ghost for over 50 years? The soldiers who serve at Nathula don't worry about explanations. They know what they've experienced. They know what they've seen and felt. They know that when they're on duty in that frozen, dangerous place, they're not alone. Harbhajan Singh is there with them, still serving, still protecting. still doing his duty. They tell stories about specific incidents. A soldier who was about to step onto an area of snow that looked safe but collapsed into a hidden crevasse moments later, after he felt a strong urge to stop and change direction. A patrol that took shelter just before an avalanche roared down exactly where they had been standing, because they all suddenly felt they needed to move. A sentry who saw a figure in the snow during a storm and followed it, only to discover it had led him away from an area that was hit by falling ice minutes later. In each case, the soldiers attribute their survival to Harbhajan Singh. They believe he's watching over them, guiding them, protecting them. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, the fact remains that soldiers in one of the most dangerous postings in the world feel safer and more confident because they believe a fallen comrade is still fighting alongside them. There's something deeply moving about this story, regardless of whether you accept the supernatural elements. A soldier died doing his duty. His comrades refused to let him be forgotten. They kept his memory alive in such a powerful way that he became real to them again. Real enough to see, real enough to follow orders from, real enough to trust with their lives. Or, if you prefer the supernatural explanation, a soldier died, but his dedication to duty was so strong that death itself couldn't stop him from serving. He came back, not as a monster or a terror, but as a protector. He continues to do the job he was doing when he died, watching over the soldiers who followed after him, making sure they stay safe in a place where danger is constant. Either way, Lance Naik Harbhajan Singh, now honorary Captain Harbhajan Singh, remains on active duty with the Indian Army. He patrols his section of the border. He provides his warnings. He goes on his scheduled leave twice a year. He draws his salary. He receives the respect and recognition due to any soldier who serves faithfully and well. And at Nathula, on the frozen border between India and China, soldiers sleep a little easier knowing that one of their own, someone who gave everything for this place, is still there watching over them, still keeping guard, still serving his country more than 50 years after an avalanche should have ended his service. The mystery remains. Is Harbhajan Singh really there, a ghost soldier keeping eternal watch? Or is he a powerful belief that has taken on a life of its own? Does it matter which explanation is true if the result is the same? The soldiers at Nathula know their answer. They've seen him, they've felt his presence, they trust him with their lives. And whether he's supernatural or psychological, real or imagined, he's as much a part of that border post as the mountains themselves. Captain Harbhajan Singh, the soldier who never stopped serving, the guardian of Nathula, the ghost who became a legend, and the legend that might just be real. Last story, the woman who hung from the trees. This story comes from a small village in West Bengal, India. It's not my story exactly, but one that was told to me by a friend about someone he knows. A friend of a friend, if you will. The kind of story that gets passed along from person to person, each time told with the same details, the same sense of unease, the same warning hidden within it. The man this happened to lived in a typical rural village. The kind where life moves at a different pace than in the cities, where people know their neighbors, where families have lived in the same houses for generations, where traditions are still followed and old beliefs still hold weight. It's the kind of place where modern skepticism hasn't quite taken over, where people still believe in things that can't be easily explained by science or logic. In these villages, houses are built differently than they are in cities or more developed areas. They're often simpler structures, made to suit the needs of rural life and the climate of the region. One of the biggest differences that people from cities notice right away is the bathroom situation. In many village homes, especially older ones, the bathrooms aren't attached to the main house. They're separate structures located outside, sometimes across a courtyard or a small open area. This might seem inconvenient to people who are used to modern homes where you can just walk down a hallway to reach the bathroom. But in villages, this is normal. It's just how things are. You get used to it. You learn to carry a flashlight or a lantern when you need to go at night. You learn to be aware of your surroundings as you cross that open space between your house and the bathroom. The man in the story lived in exactly this type of house. He had grown up there, had spent his entire life there, so the layout was completely familiar to him. He knew every stone in the courtyard, every tree that grew nearby, every sound that the night made in that place. There was nothing about his home or the area around it that should have surprised him or caught him off guard. On this particular night, everything started out completely normal. He'd gone to bed at his usual time, probably tired from a day of work. In villages, people tend to keep earlier hours than in cities. They wake up with the sun and go to bed not too long after dark. There's no late-night television or internet browsing to keep them up. Life follows a more natural rhythm tied to daylight and darkness. But in the middle of the night, he woke up, not because of any noise or disturbance, just because his body was telling him he needed to use the bathroom. This happens to everyone. It's a normal, ordinary part of being human. Nothing strange or unusual about it at all. He sat up in bed, probably still half asleep, that foggy state where you're awake enough to function but not really fully conscious yet. He found his slippers or sandals in the dark, maybe grabbed a flashlight or just relied on whatever moonlight was available. Then he made his way to the door of his house and stepped outside into the courtyard. The night air would have been different from the air inside the house. Cooler, fresher, carrying the sounds of the rural night. Crickets chirping, maybe a dog barking in the distance, the rustle of leaves in whatever breeze was blowing. The sky above would have been much darker than city skies, full of stars you can really see when there's no light pollution. In villages, the night is truly dark in a way that city people rarely experience. He started walking across the courtyard toward where the bathroom was located. His eyes were probably still adjusting to the darkness, his mind still foggy with sleep. He was just focused on his immediate need, on getting to the bathroom, and then getting back to bed as quickly as possible. Not thinking about anything in particular, not on alert or worried about anything. Just moving automatically through a familiar space. And then he saw her. There was a woman sitting in the courtyard, just sitting there on the ground in the middle of the night. And she was crying. Now, seeing someone sitting alone in your courtyard in the middle of the night would be strange enough on its own. But hearing her crying made it even more unusual. What was she doing there? Why was she crying? Where had she come from? For a moment he just stood there, surprised by her presence, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His sleepy brain was trying to catch up, trying to figure out if this was real or if he was still partly asleep and dreaming. But the sound of her crying was real enough, soft sobs that carried through the quiet night air. The kind of crying that sounds like it comes from deep sadness or pain. Not the loud crying of anger or frustration, but the quiet, broken crying of someone who is truly suffering. Despite being sleepy and in a hurry, despite the strangeness of the situation, his first instinct was kindness. This is important to note. His immediate reaction wasn't fear or anger or suspicion. It was concern for another person who seemed to be in distress. He stopped walking and spoke to her. "Sister, why are you crying?" he asked. His use of the word sister is significant. In Indian culture, calling a woman sister is a sign of respect. It's a way of acknowledging that you see her as someone worthy of dignity, someone you would protect and respect like you would your own sister. It creates a relationship of trust and propriety, indicating that you have no bad intentions toward her. "Do you need any help?" he continued. His voice was probably gentle, concerned. He was offering assistance to someone who seemed to need it. But the woman didn't respond. She just kept sitting there, crying. She didn't look up at him or acknowledge that he had spoken. It was as if she hadn't heard him at all, or as if she was so lost in her grief that she couldn't register anything else around her. He stood there for another moment waiting to see if she would answer, but there was nothing. Just continued quiet crying from the figure sitting in his courtyard. Now at this point, many things could have gone through his mind. He could have been more insistent, could have approached her more closely to make sure she heard him. He could have gone back inside to wake up other family members to help deal with this strange situation. He could have been more alarmed by the presence of a crying woman in his courtyard in the middle of the night. But remember, he was sleepy. His mind wasn't working at full capacity. He was in that state where you're functional enough to move around and handle basic needs, but not really alert or thinking deeply about things. And he really did need to use the bathroom. That physical need was pressing, becoming more urgent. So he made a decision. The woman clearly didn't want help, or at least wasn't responding to his offer. Maybe she was from a nearby house and had come out for some reason. Maybe she would be fine on her own. He had tried to help and she hadn't responded. He couldn't force someone to accept help they didn't seem to want. He left her there, still sitting and crying in the courtyard, and continued on his way to the bathroom. He took care of his business, probably thinking vaguely about the strange woman and wondering what her story was, but not dwelling on it too much, just ready to get back to bed and back to sleep. When he finished and started walking back across the courtyard toward his house, he glanced toward the spot where the woman had been sitting, but she wasn't there anymore. The spot was empty. She had gone. He felt a small sense of relief at that. Whatever her problem had been, she had apparently resolved it or moved on. Maybe she had returned to wherever she had come from. Maybe she had just been passing through and had stopped to rest for a moment. In any case, she was gone now and he could go back to bed without worrying about her. He took another step or two toward his house, his mind already moving on from the encounter, already thinking about his warm bed waiting for him. And then he heard it. A voice, a woman's voice, but not like any voice he had ever heard before. It was shrill, high-pitched in an unnatural way. The quality of it was nasal, like it was coming through a nose rather than a mouth, or like it was being produced in a way that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. It wasn't quite human. It had something wrong about it, something that immediately set every nerve on edge. And what the voice said made his blood run cold. "You called me sister, so I let you go today," the voice said with that horrible, shrill, nasal quality, "or I would have twisted your neck right away." Time seemed to stop. Those words hung in the air like a threat, like a promise, like a revelation of what had almost happened. The casual mention of twisting his neck, of killing him, said with such matter-of-fact certainty. As if it would have been the easiest thing in the world, as if she had done it before and would do it again. But she had let him go, because he had called her sister, because he had shown respect instead of something else. Whatever test he had been subjected to without knowing it, he had apparently passed. His body was probably frozen in fear at this point. Every instinct screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. That voice wasn't natural. Those words weren't the words of a normal grieving woman who had been sitting in his courtyard. He turned toward where the voice had come from. His eyes searched the darkness, trying to find the source, trying to see where she had gone. Where was she? Who or what was she? And then he saw her, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. The woman was hanging upside down from one of the nearby trees, not hanging like someone who had been hanged and was dead, hanging like a bat hangs, gripping the branch with her feet or somehow attached to it, her body suspended upside down in the air, her head pointing toward the ground. No human being hangs from a tree like that. No human being could position themselves that way and hold it. No human being has a voice like the one he had just heard. Whatever this was, whatever he was looking at, it wasn't human. It never had been. The figure hanging from the tree was the same woman who had been sitting in the courtyard crying. He could tell by her shape, by her clothes, by something about her that he recognized even in the darkness. Now she was revealed for what she truly was. Not a grieving woman who needed help, but something else, something supernatural, something dangerous. She had tested him. That's what the whole encounter had been, a test of his character, of how he would treat a woman who appeared to be vulnerable and in distress. Men who would have approached her with bad intentions. Men who would have tried to take advantage of what they thought was a woman alone and helpless in the night. Those men would have failed the test. And their punishment would have been swift and terrible, a twisted neck, death in the darkness of a village courtyard. But he had shown respect. He had called her sister. He had offered help in a kind and proper way. and so he was allowed to live. She had let him go, had let him pass safely through his own courtyard, had spared him the fate that she apparently dealt to men who failed her test. He didn't wait around to see more, he ran, his need for sleep completely forgotten, replaced by pure survival instinct. He ran back to his house, probably not even feeling his feet hitting the ground, just desperate to get inside, to get to safety, to put walls between himself and whatever was hanging from that tree. He made it inside and slammed the door behind him. His heart was pounding, his hands shaking. The image of that figure hanging upside down from the tree was burned into his mind. The sound of that shrill nasal voice saying she would have twisted his neck was echoing in his ears. He probably didn't sleep for the rest of that night, just sat there in the darkness of his house, listening to every sound, wondering if she was still out there, wondering if calling her sister had really been enough, or if she might change her mind and come for him anyway. When morning finally came and the sun rose, he probably went outside carefully to check the courtyard and the tree, but there would have been nothing there. No sign that anything unusual had happened, just an empty courtyard and a normal tree with nothing hanging from it, as if the whole thing had been a dream. But he knew it wasn't a dream. He knew what he had seen and heard, and he knew how close he had come to death that night. This story, as told to me by my friend, is apparently not unique. There are similar tales from other parts of India, from different villages and different regions. The details vary slightly, but the core elements remain the same. A woman appears at night, often crying or in apparent distress. A man encounters her. How he treats her determines what happens next. Men who treat her with respect, who address her properly, who offer help without ulterior motives are allowed to go unharmed. They might not even realize at the time that they were dealing with something supernatural. They might just think they met a strange woman and that's the end of it. Only later do they discover the truth, often through some revelation like the one in this story, where the entity reveals itself before letting them go. But men who approach these women with bad intentions, who see a vulnerable woman alone at night as an opportunity, rather than a person deserving of respect, those men face a very different fate. They don't come home in the morning. They're found dead, often with broken necks or other signs of supernatural violence. The spirits test their character and find them wanting, and the punishment is immediate and final. My friend, when telling me this story, offered an interpretation that I found both sad and compelling. He suggested that these spirits, when they were alive, were women who faced grave injustice at the hands of men. Perhaps they were assaulted or murdered or suffered some other terrible wrong that was never avenged, never made right. They died with that trauma, that rage, that sense of injustice still burning inside them. And now they roam around as spirits, unable to rest, unable to find peace. The wrath is still in their hearts. The need for justice is still driving them. So they test men, giving each one a chance to prove whether he would have been like the men who hurt them, or whether he is different, whether he is decent and respectful, or whether he sees women as objects to be used. It's a form of justice, perhaps, a way for these spirits to protect other women who might fall victim to bad men, a way to punish those who would harm the vulnerable. Each man who fails their test is one less predator walking the earth. Each man who passes is allowed to live, perhaps having learned without fully realizing it to treat women with the respect they deserve. What's truly astounding about these stories, what makes them different from tales of simple vengeful ghosts or evil spirits, is that these entities still show mercy. Despite their rage, despite their trauma, despite everything they suffered, they can still recognize decency when they see it. They can still distinguish between good men and bad men. They can still muster enough humanity, enough fairness, to let the good ones go unharmed. That speaks to something profound about the human soul, doesn't it? Even after death, even after terrible trauma, even transformed into something supernatural and fearsome, there's still that core of fairness, that ability to judge character, that capacity to show mercy to those who deserve it. These aren't mindlessly evil spirits attacking anyone they encounter. They're not demons or monsters without conscience or reason. They're something more complex. They're wounded souls still seeking justice, still making judgments, still capable of both terrible violence and surprising mercy. When my friend told me this story, he ended it with a prayer. "May God save these souls from misery," he said. "May they attain peace." And I think that's the right response. Because these aren't evil beings, not really. They're victims who never got justice, who never got healing, who are still trapped in the trauma of what happened to them. They deserve peace. They deserve to let go of the rage and pain that keeps them bound to this world. They deserve to move on to whatever comes next, to find rest and healing and freedom from the suffering that defines their existence. But until that happens, they continue their work, testing men, protecting the vulnerable, dispensing their own form of justice in the darkness of rural nights. And men who walk alone at night would do well to remember the lesson of these stories. Treat every woman with respect. Offer help with pure intentions. See people as people, not as opportunities or objects. Because you never know when the woman you encounter might be one of these spirits. You never know when you're being tested, and the consequences of failing that test are final and terrible. The man in this story was lucky. He passed without even knowing he was being tested. His natural decency, his instinct to show respect and offer help saved his life. He called her sister, and that simple word, that gesture of familial respect, was enough to spare him. But he'll never forget that night. The image of the woman hanging upside down from the tree, the sound of that unnatural voice, the casual threat of what would have happened if he had acted differently. It's a reminder that will stay with him forever. A reminder that his choices matter, that how he treats people has consequences, that decency isn't just about being a good person, but sometimes about survival itself. And for those of us hearing this story, it serves as a reminder, too, about the importance of respect, especially for women, especially for those who seem vulnerable, about the reality that evil actions have consequences, even if not always in ways we expect or understand, about the possibility that the world contains more than we can easily explain, that there are forces and beings operating beyond our normal understanding. It's easy to dismiss these stories as superstition or folklore, to say they're just tales meant to scare people or teach moral lessons. And maybe that's all they are. Maybe these spirits don't really exist. Maybe they're just stories. But in India, in these villages where the stories come from, people believe them. They take them seriously. They teach their children to be respectful and careful. They remember that the world is bigger and stranger than what we can see in daylight. They maintain a healthy respect for the unknown, for the supernatural, for the possibility that we don't understand everything about existence. And maybe there's wisdom in that. Maybe we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss the experiences and beliefs of people from different cultures and backgrounds. Maybe we should stay open to the possibility that reality contains mysteries we haven't solved, phenomena we can't explain, entities that exist outside our current scientific understanding. After all, every culture in the world has stories about spirits and ghosts and supernatural beings. These stories span continents and centuries. They appear in every type of society, from the most primitive to the most advanced. That universality suggests something, doesn't it? Even if the literal details aren't true, even if there aren't really spirits hanging from trees testing men's character, maybe these stories point to some deeper truth about human nature, about justice, about the consequences of our actions. They remind us that how we treat others matters, that respect and decency aren't just social niceties, but fundamental requirements of being human, that those who prey on the vulnerable will eventually face consequences, that goodness is recognized and rewarded, while evil is punished. Whether those consequences come from supernatural spirits, or from the natural working out of karma, or from social and legal systems, or from the simple fact that being a bad person leads to a bad life, the basic message remains the same. Be good to others, show respect, offer help. Treat people, especially women, with the dignity they deserve. The man in this story learned that lesson in the most dramatic and frightening way possible. He came within inches of death without even realizing he was in danger. Only his natural decency, his instinctive respect saved him. He was tested and passed, though he didn't know he was being tested until it was over. Most of us will probably never have such a clear and dramatic test. We won't encounter supernatural spirits in the night who literally judge us worthy of life or death based on how we treat them. But we are being tested all the time in smaller ways. Every interaction we have with other people is a test of our character. Every choice we make about how to treat others is a judgment about who we are as people. And while the consequences might not be as immediate or dramatic as a twisted neck from a vengeful spirit, they are real nonetheless. People remember how you treat them. Your reputation is built on thousands of small choices about how you interact with others. Your character is defined by what you do when you think no one important is watching. So treat everyone with respect. Not because they might be a supernatural entity testing you, though who knows, maybe they are. But because it's the right thing to do. Because everyone deserves basic human dignity. Because you never know what someone else has been through, what pain they're carrying, what they might need from you in that moment. Be the kind of person who would pass the test. Be the kind of person who instinctively shows respect and offers help. Be the kind of person who calls someone sister or brother as a sign of familial care rather than treating them as a stranger or an opportunity. And when you hear stories like this one, whether you believe in the literal truth of them or not, take the lesson they offer. Remember that the world is bigger and stranger than we often acknowledge. Remember that our actions have consequences. Remember that decency and respect aren't just about following social rules, but about recognizing the fundamental humanity in every person we encounter. The woman hanging from the tree represents something powerful. She represents justice for those who never got it in life. She represents the consequences that should come to those who harm the vulnerable. She represents the possibility of redemption for those who choose respect over exploitation. She represents the hope that even after terrible trauma, there can still be fairness, still be judgment, still be a chance for the good to be spared while the wicked face their reckoning. May these spirits find peace. May they be released from the trauma that binds them. May they finally get the justice and healing they deserve. May they move on from their vigil and find rest. But until they do, may they continue their work. May they continue to test men's character. May they continue to protect the vulnerable by punishing those who would harm them. May they serve as a reminder that how we treat others matters, that decency is not optional, that respect is not just a social convention, but a fundamental requirement of being human. And may we all, walking through our own nights and facing our own tests, have the wisdom and decency to pass, to show respect, to offer help, to see people as people, to call each other sister and brother rather than seeing opportunities for exploitation. Because you never know when you're being tested. You never know when the person in front of you is someone who will remember how you treated them. You never know when your character is being judged, and your fate being decided based on choices that might seem small in the moment. Be good, be decent, be respectful. Not out of fear of supernatural punishment, though these stories certainly suggest that might be a consideration, but because it's who you should be, because it's the right way to live, because everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about and deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness. That's the real lesson of the woman who hung from the trees. That's the truth buried in this story and all the others like it. That's what we should carry with us from these tales of supernatural justice and mercy. Be the kind of person who would call her sister. Be the kind of person who would offer help. Be the kind of person who would be allowed to go home safely because your character passed the test. And perhaps, in being that kind of person, we can help create a world where women don't have to become vengeful spirits to find justice. Where trauma is healed rather than carried into death. Where respect is so universal that these tests aren't necessary. Until then, the spirits continue their vigil, and we would all do well to remember their lessons